Hello, this is Graham Humphreys. I'm an illustrator based in the UK in London, and I'm enjoying doing lots of very horrible things with paint.
All right, and welcome to the Station of Decapitation Without Your Head. I'm Nasty Neil.
This is Annabelle Lecter.
That would make me Terrible Troy.
Yes, and we are joined by David Chaudoir of Bad Acid.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
Welcome.
Yeah. And to let everyone know, Bad Acid is a horror short. It's not like that you sell bad acid.
Some people probably do, but that's not what this is about.
Yeah, not David necessarily, though.
No, not me personally.
Oh, can you give people out there an idea, without spoiling it too much, what Bad Acid is about?
It is a short film, obviously set in England because that's where I'm from. It's about a washed-up hypnotist who is desperate to recapture his fame. And he gets into a fight with one of his audience members. And part of his act is a genie that he polishes a lamp, and because he's hypnotized somebody, he suggests that there's a genie coming out of the lamp. After this fight with the audience member, he acquires this genuine Babylonian lamp, and it was owned by an old rocker. And it was used as a stash box, and inside are some tabs of acid with a fairly frightening symbol on them. But this chap's got nothing to lose, and he's got a track record of abuse, and he takes one, and he starts seeing visions. And some of the visions are benign, like him recapturing his fame, and some of them are malevolent. And as he continues to perform after he's had his trip, these malevolent forces start spreading. And I'll leave it there without giving too much away. Mm-hmm. But he finally gets his fame in the end, but not in the way that he expected.
Mm-hmm. So what drew you to the story? What inspired you to write the story?
I've always been interested in magic and portrayals of magic in film and television. And as a kid, I had conjuring tricks and things like that. And obviously, at the same time, I was fascinated by horror films. In the UK, on the national channel on BBC Two, on a Friday night, they would have a double bill of horror films. They'd usually start with a classic like an RKO, Frankenstein, or The Wolf Man, or something like that, or The Invisible Man, or The Beast with Five Fingers. And then they'd put on a more contemporary and often a British film. It was obviously Dracula, the Hammer films, and the most interesting ones to me were the ones that sort of broke into the sort of dark humour, especially Theatre of Blood with Vincent Price that was made in London, and another film called From Beyond the Grave with Peter Cushing, and it was they're all sort of like cautionary tales, really, the From Beyond the Grave. And it was those films which were contemporary then in the 1970s, and now they seem incredibly dated in many respects. But I love that.
Still great.
Yeah, they are wonderful. I love that sense of horror and humour, and I love the sort of quintessentially British approach to those films, even though they were produced by American producers and largely American money. But that's what to my mind, in some respects, that's the sort of heyday of British horror filmmaking. So I had this love of magic, and I had obviously a love of horror. And I've been writing for several years, and I wrote a couple of feature films. And as a writer, it's very hard in order really to break into the industry. So I thought, well, look, nobody's going to direct my short for me. I might as well do it myself. And I have a background in directing, but I've directed things like commercials and music videos, and I worked in TV. I've worked in TV for 25 years, and I've made things like I made a promo for The Walking Dead that went viral, and I've done stuff for The Wire, a lot of American shows. I used to work at Fox UK, and so I thought, look, I'm going to raise the money and make this myself. So the interest in magic was there. And in Britain, and I think it's an American movement, really. You have something called bizarre magic, which is using ghosts and spirits and things like that within a performance, but using magic trickery to make them come alive, and seances, theatrical seances, as opposed to real, in inverted commas, seances. So I had an interest in bizarre magic, and I started writing for a bizarre magic magazine in the UK called The Mystic Menagerie, and that kind of sort of got me thinking about a short film with a magic plot. And I was also interested in hypnotism. There's a hypnotist in the UK called Anthony Jacquin, who's toured actually quite extensively in America as well. And he released a DVD. A lot of magicians use DVDs these days as opposed to books to learn their craft. And he released a DVD which was largely aimed at magicians, about how to use hypnotism in performance. And he hypnotized a young British magician called Chris Harding. And as part of his performance, he said, I'm going to, there's a genie behind me. And you could see this guy who'd been hypnotized. He truly believed that he was seeing a genie behind the hypnotist's back. And then Anthony said, and now he's got long fingernails and sharp teeth. And you saw this young magician sort of recoiling in his seat. And that was the seed, really. And Anthony is a very, very successful hypnotist. He's a very successful man. But I wanted somebody who had character flaws and wanted something, and that desire was fame, to recapture his fame. So he's a rather awful character. So he's a self-interested, hubristic character, and he gets it in the end, basically. So that's really where it came from.
Which is that is sort of a classic thing in stories about wishes. Is that you get what you wish for, but not exactly how you expect it.
Exactly. It conforms to some classic sort of story types, as you say. It's got a wise man, it's got a fool, it's got a lover, it's and as you say, it is a classic story, and that's what I love about the slightly older films. Is obviously in more modern films, the final girl is the one who didn't have sex at the beginning of the film, but this is a slightly more modern phenomenon, the desire for fame. So, yes, it's that classic cautionary tale, careful what you wish for.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned you wrote some feature films. Would you ever want to fill out Bad Acid and make it into a feature?
Several people have suggested it. Several people have suggested, because it doesn't conform to a lot of short horror films, are in some respects quite not basic, and I'm not doing them down, but they paint a very small world. It might be somebody in their room or whatever it is, whereas obviously I have a lot of characters, and I have sort of a broader story in mind. I don't know whether I'd want to take that further. I've started writing an anthology horror, which is several small stories linked together with a wraparound story. Maybe, perhaps, I don't know. I won't rule anything out. If somebody came to me and said, "We'd like you to write that as a feature," I would do it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm a fan of anthology films in general, and they've kind of made a comeback the last few years. So
That's right. Yeah, there was the Southbound film recently,
Mhm.
and people are very affectionate about the film Trick or Treat, aren't they?
Yes.
Trick or Treat.
Yes, that's very good. So
Yeah.
what are some of your favorites?
I love. I mean, obviously, as I said, the British films, but being in Britain, a lot of our culture, a lot of TV has come from America. Ever since childhood. I mean, we had Starsky and Hutch and the Rockford Files and California Highway Patrol, and so we've been steeped in sort of American culture, and obviously things like Halloween came over, and I thought that was possibly one of the most terrifying films I'd ever seen when I first saw it. Sorry, did you ask specifically about what horror anthologies I like?
Yeah, I meant, but anything's fine. But yeah, anthologies.
Yeah, yes, the British ones. I've seen recently. I saw. It's not necessarily a horror film, an anthology horror film, but I saw the VHS series, which was interesting. And I also have seen the ABCs of Death, which that's a slightly more tenuous thing. And then obviously Trick or Treat and Southbound I thought were interesting. I wasn't a great fan of Southbound, but I thought it was very, very interesting. And I was glad to see that they had, that the anthology is back, as it were.
Now, outside of the magic, I think your films film very well. Like, were you the cinematographer on there, or who did you work with?
I worked with a chap called Andy Horner, who is a British cinematographer, who I'd worked with in commercials and music videos. And he's extremely gifted and extremely fast working. And we shot the whole film in 4 days. So you need to have somebody that you have a rapport with. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I did was every single shot I storyboarded. So everybody knew where they were, the actors, Tristan Bynt, who's the lead character. We could all just look at the storyboard and say, this is the next shot that I'd like to achieve. So he is brilliant. And that's what I wanted to do with my film, was bring production value to it, because I paid everybody on my film, which is quite rare on a short film these days. And, everybody gave their best. So even though we had an extremely limited budget, I had an art director and an art director's assistant, and we had a first AD and, everything that you need to make a film, apart from the fact that we had to work very, very quickly. But sorry, carry on.
No, I was just going to say some of the shots that I liked especially were from the viewpoint of the magician on stage, where you see like the lights glaring at him and it's kind of blurry, and
yeah,
I thought that was done very well.
Yeah, I mean, it was just the whole idea is that he's sort of almost blinded by this desire for fame, if you wanted to get metaphorical about it. And yes, because I'd worked with Andy and we'd discussed the shots beforehand, and those were all storyboarded, the lens flares and things like that. I'm glad you liked it, and I'm glad you picked up on it.
Now, where did you film some of that? Because was it like in a real location?
Yeah, everything was on location, and it was all shot in London. Despite the fact that I'm not sure whether you noticed, but people in the film are talking with a strange accent, which is a Yorkshire accent, which if you watched American Werewolf in London recently, you'd get the link between the accents. But it was all shot in North London, but I didn't want it to be a London film, because I wanted it. I love in England we have different regions with different accents, as I'm sure you do in America, and I know you do in America. But I wanted to capture something that wasn't just another London film. Mm-hmm. And the locations we had a theatre or a stage, which was part of it's a performance space, which is part of a London council where they host music events. And in the basement, there was a kitchen, or it was actually a toilet, I think, which is where we shot the police interview room. And we had a really grotty working men's club, which had 3 different rooms. So we used those for the performance elements of when the magician is failing at the beginning, and then the final performance when the girl sees something coming out of the lamp. And so those were really, really run down. That was a really run down working men's club in London. And then for expediency and budget reasons, we shot in Suki Richardson, who is the producer. We shot in her flat. That's where Tristan Byte, the guy playing the magician, that's where he lived. And then we shot in an amazing place, which is called the Last Tuesday Society, which is the shop sequence. And that is a privately owned museum which has got all these really peculiar oddities in it. I think it's got a brontosaurus skull in there, and that's where when you see the antique dealer. And they've got some very bizarre things in there, like they've got purportedly, I don't know whether this is genuine, but used condoms from the Rolling Stones in a jar. I mean, yeah, lovely stuff. It's a very peculiar place owned by a very strange man. And we had something like, I think we had 3 hours in there to shoot that, which is like going like the clappers. And then above this museum, it's tiny little place. There was a bar that was going to open at a certain time, so we had to get out of there pretty rapidly. So it was all shot in London, in and around London.
Now, do you yourself believe in hypnosis or magic?
I don't believe in magic as in real witches and ghoulies and demons and stuff like that. I've worked for a professor called Professor Richard Wiseman, who is a very active debunker in this country, and he's written several books, and one of them is called Paranormality, which is the discussion around why people think they see ghosts and stuff, and it's a very convincing argument as to why people might experience things. And I do believe in hypnosis purely because I've seen Anthony Jacquin at work. I think that there is some kind of compliance involved, and I think that there is some, on certain occasions, people would like to actually get up on stage and make a fool of themselves. But there are some certain phenomena which are undoubtedly real. And when I was researching this film, I saw a documentary that we made for the BBC about a genuine doctor in a hospital, and his peers think it's almost like quackery, hypnosis, but he deals with a subject which is close to me, which is people with ulcerative colitis and effectively irritable bowel syndrome. And he uses hypnosis, and the results that he has had have actually been peer reviewed and have been proven to actually been successful. So magic in, people casting spells, not necessarily, but hypnosis, yes. And the use of hallucinogenic drugs thrown into the mix as well. I think that has the ability to make you see things. When I was growing up, I live in a market town called Newbury, or I used to as a child, and there were a bunch of people who used to take a lot of drugs, and one of the stories that they told me was that they'd all gone out and picked mushrooms, magic mushrooms, and they didn't know how many to take, and so they ate 200 each, and they were completely and utterly in another world. And they told me this story about this sort of sympathetic thing that you can get. One of them said, gosh, look at X. He seems to be growing into the ground. And this chap was wearing a camouflage jacket, and he saw grass growing through himself, and everybody couldn't find him for 2 hours. And I said, well, what was happening? He said, well, I was Earth for 2 hours. So, the people who take LSD and take hallucinogenics often have this sympathetic thing. And I was interested in that when I wrote my story, that the idea of this vision that the magician had seen could somehow creep into, somehow through the magic lamp, or his hypnotism could creep into the girl who sees something coming out of the lamp herself. Mm-hmm. I'm kind of interested in that sort of crossover. What's real, what isn't real, mm-hmm. What's imagined, what's conjured, mm-hmm. and that's in my film. It's very open to suggestion as to what exactly is going on.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned your friends, but Judi, did you yourself have any experience with the mushrooms or acid?
No, I never took them. I was always too frightened that I would go. I mean, that's another thing, that the whole bad acid thing plays on the urban legend of the person who thought they were an orange and therefore they peeled themselves, or mm-hmm. they thought they could fly and flew out the window. A lot of those stories have been debunked. They're not actually real. They were sort of, around the time that people in the 60s and 70s and Haight-Ashbury were experimenting with that stuff. Undoubtedly, people did lose their marbles, though. They did completely lose it by overindulgence. And so I was sort of tapping into that in the film, that, the whole bad acid thing is, there was talk of, I think it was was it the Monterey Festival, or was it Woodstock, that they said, don't take the brown acid or something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I never indulged. I thought that my mind was too weak. I'd see something that I'd never come back from.
I think that was exactly Jefferson Airplane, wasn't it?
Was it Jefferson Airplane that put
I think it was Grace Slick that said that, don't take the brown acid.
Yeah. So it sort of taps into those, that kind of folklore around the whole drug, really.
Yeah. And if you're creative anyway, you're writing these things, you don't need it.
Exactly. I mean, you could, again, no, I don't think anybody has put a trip on film without overuse of sort of distorting lenses and, putting on, I mean, obviously the films of the 1970s, like there was Coogan's Bluff with Clint Eastwood. There's a scene when he goes into an acid club. I think it's called the Pigeon-Toed Orange Peel. A ridiculous name. Anyway, the usual cinematic trick was to put on one of those oil projectors, and there you have it, a trip. I've never seen the Monkees film, The Trip, though. Have either of you lot seen it?
I have not.
No.
Maybe Troy, he's a Monkees fan.
No, I haven't seen that.
No. Well, that was a film directed by Jack Nicholson and
oh, really?
Written by him. So I'd be interested. I've never gotten around to see it, but one day I will. But that apparently has a good trip sequence.
Very interesting. So, what was it? What places have you shown the movie?
I've shown it at festivals. I got it into. I was very, very lucky. Very early on, I got it screened at a festival in East London, and that kind of opened doors because. It has now gotten into the London Short Film Festival, which is BAFTA accredited. That's our British Academy of Film and Television accredited festival. So that's very, very good news. And I think that's a direct result of it being screened at this short-sighted cinema event. And because it's slightly unconventional, it hasn't got into many horror festivals. And I think because of the language, because of the Yorkshire accent, in Britain, we're steeped in your culture. There's so much American TV that I think Britons have a better ear for American people speaking with American accent than the other way around. I think so. It hasn't got into. I think it's got into 5 or 10 festivals in the States, quite small ones. But it's coming soon to Amazon. So in the new year, it will be on Amazon.
Oh, very cool.
Which is fantastic. That was a direct result of getting it into a festival last week. And all the finalists at this festival are having their films bought and shown by Amazon. And they say that they're going to promote it. So it will be not necessarily on the front page, but there's going to be a short film collection on Amazon, and you'll be able to watch it there.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's fantastic. Very pleased to get that distribution, because that is the way, that's the way the media is going, is, pay-per-view and video on demand, and, whether it's Netflix or Amazon, that's the way the industry is going.
So what festival arranged this with Amazon?
It's a very small festival, and it's called Promax, and it was it's called the Promax Film Festival, and I used to work in promotions for Fox, and I used to do stuff for Channel 4 and BBC as well, and I was allowed, because of that background that I'm in, I was allowed to put it forward for this festival, and through that being a finalist, Amazon had bought the film and they're going to be putting it on there, and I would get paid a very small amount of money every time it's viewed, but it's something, a lot of short film makers give their films away, so I'm very, very happy about that.
And there's so many people that you hear about short films in the festival circuit, and then where do they go? There's nowhere to access them. There's short films I've heard about for years that no one can see still, because they're still running around in festivals. So
yeah, exactly. And I mean, the funny thing as well about festivals is a lot of them really are for filmmakers, and unless obviously the genre festivals get fans because they're there to see a new release, whether it's the new Blair Witch or whatever it is that gets shown. It's almost like a preview audience to build a buzz around it, that these the bigger studios put these films into genre festivals, whether it's Scream Fest or Fright Fest in the UK. But often the short films are sort of tucked away in a corner somewhere, and as you say, they go around on the circuit and then they disappear, or people just stick them on YouTube or Vimeo or something like that. And as you say, they disappear out of sight, which is a shame.
It really is. There's so much work and care put into these. Anybody doing a short pretty much probably knows they're not going to make any great money out of it, and the hope that maybe it'll go into something else. But if regular everyday people don't see it, then it's almost like the festival circuit is hypersaturated. There's so many horror shorts, and it's all the same people seeing them.
Yeah.
And the competition is so high that the chances of breaking out of that aren't great. And if you can't create a public of real people, then what happens with it? It just, like we're saying, it just seems to get trapped and never escape.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, the whole point of making a short for me was, one, it is my first short, and there are limitations within the film, but the point was to actually go and do it, and to actually try and use my writing and get something made. But also it's a learning experience for me, because of obviously any short filmmaker making their first short, you're learning about actors, you're learning about sight lines, you're learning about special effects. I come from a special effects background, so I didn't necessarily need to learn that. But and I've obviously am very, very lucky that I've worked in, as I said, music videos and commercials. So I had connections, like the sound was done by a very accomplished sound designer called Rich Martin at a company called Envy, and that all adds to the professional quality of it. Whereas some short filmmakers don't have access to to that kind of equipment or that kind of talent. But as you say, these films that people have slaved over just disappear or go into a festival to be watched by other filmmakers. And I'm very glad that Amazon's picked it up. And I know that there's another streaming service called Shudder, which is opened in the States and it's open in the UK.
They like my pumpkin.
Well, they're starting to show shorts, so that I think that the opportunity is going to open up. But I think a lot of people, short filmmaking. I mean, I made this short, 1 to try and 2 to. It's almost like a calling card to say, look, I can direct, and I'm going to go back next year in 2017. I'm going to make another short, and I'm going to just keep knocking on the door, keep trying, keep making, and at the same time writing my feature. And who knows what will happen? I think that everybody making shorts is doing it for that kind of reason.
Mm-hmm. So, at the convention, were you present at any of the conventions that it was played at?
Yes, I have, and the very first film festival that I showed it at was, as I said, the Short-Sighted Cinema in East London, and I watched it with the editor, who actually was the executive producer, who put half the money up for it, and that's when I decided to cut it down, because I thought there were pace issues, that it was running too slowly at times, and it was very, very useful to see it in front of an audience. And I also showed it at the very first screening. That it wasn't a paying audience, but it was like a private screening. Was an organisation called the London Horror Society. And that is a group of horror nuts who meet in a in a room above a pub, and they put little films on that people have made. And it's funny because within that scene, there are some people who are now, Kate Shenton has screened films there, and she made a feature this year. So, there are people who are trying to get stuff done and are achieving it.
What was the experience like to watch it with an audience? It seems like you actually took you actually used it as a plus. If you thought maybe they didn't like something, you changed it.
Yeah, obviously it's well documented that big studio pictures have screenings, and they hand out audience cards to cut things down. To be honest, I'm with Woody Allen now. I could never understand. I remember him saying, once I've cut my film, that's it. I don't watch it again. And watching your own film in front of an audience, what I call a hostile audience, i.e. they're there just to watch films. They've got no expectation of your film. They're not necessarily horror fans. It was terrifying, to be honest with you. I was dripping with sweat. And I could see, I was thinking, God, just get to the next bit, and that's when I cut, some pauses out of it. So, it went down from something like 18.5 minutes to about 16.5 minutes.
Damn, there was a lot of pauses, man.
Yeah, exactly.
2 minutes of pauses.
That sounds too stressful. I don't think I can handle that.
Yeah, I know that several versions of The Evil Dead exist because they had audience screenings and they decided to change things. And, I know that Kubrick, when he showed The Shining in America, when he got it back to Britain, because the release schedule was America first, then Britain, I think he cut about 10 minutes out of it. And the British version is even sparser than the American version. There's a scene when Shelley Duvall is running through the hotel right at the end, and that you see skeletons and things like that in the American version. In the British version, that wasn't in there at all. And Kubrick cut out the sequence with the doctor at the beginning with Danny talking about his imaginary friend. That went as well. So, I think a lot of filmmakers, do hack their work about.
Is that hard to do, to edit your own material?
Very. I mean, but also because it's like, because Tristan Bynt, the lead character, was so amazing. He was a revelation to me. I originally wrote the story around a slightly older character, but Tristan was so interesting at the audition that I thought, I'm going to cast him, even though he's not necessarily the right age. But he made, and I slightly tweaked the script to refine it away from a slightly older person. And it's very hard when you have to see an actor and say, that lovely bit that we shot is now gone. In the dream sequence, the dream sequence is about 3 times longer, and I had to cut stuff out of that. And pauses where, for me, it was great to watch, but when you watch stuff in isolation and then, as I say, you watch it in front of an audience, there's true horror right there.
Yeah. What was it about Tristan that you thought made him right for the role?
When you do an audition and you have several actors come in and they all read for the same part, it's a very hard process to distance yourself from what is, the person in front of you, what they look like on screen, and their part in your story. And when you write, if you're the writer as well, it's even harder because you've written something in isolation by yourself, and the whole film is in your head. You have a story, and you have characters, and you hear their voices and things like that. And you have a picture of who these people are. And then somebody walks into the room, and they're nothing like you imagined your character to be. And then you think, nobody knows what was in my head apart from me. And I have to, he has to be a fully realized character. I think one of the things that was interesting was my character is such an arse. He's such a self-obsessed narcissist that I wanted somebody who could give some sympathy to the character, even just a little bit. And Tristan, I saw that in Tristan, that that you could make a largely unsympathetic character slightly sympathetic. So that's what I saw in him, and he was amazing. Which I hope you saw his performance. And the other thing about the UK, just as it is in America, there are plenty of actors and actresses who you may have seen once or twice on TV or something like that. You don't know their names, and they are brilliantly talented. Yeah. And it's obviously when people, and good luck to them, you get actors like Dame Judi Dench. She's in every British film, it seems, that comes out,
and a TV show. She's everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. And much as it's like it's a marketing ploy. It has to be. You can say Tom Cruise is in this movie, and you know what you're going to get is a proven quantity. But at the same time, that then excludes some very talented people who haven't had the exposure. And one of the interesting things, obviously, was working with Tristan. And the other very interesting thing was working with Madeleine Bauer, who plays Marvin's long-suffering assistant. And as soon as that film was finished, I said to Madeleine, I feel dreadful. I haven't written enough for your character. I'm going to write you a film. So I wrote her a film, and we filmed it about 4 months after we'd finished shooting Bad Acid. It's a very, very different film. It's a monologue. So it's almost like a play directed to the camera, but she is brilliant in that. And I hope that finds an audience at some stage. It's a very difficult film to get into festivals, but it is playing at the London Short Film Festival, which I'm fantastically happy about for me selfishly, but also for her, so that other people see quite what an amazing actress she is.
What a nice guy.
Thank you very much. So I hope I haven't lingered too long. I'm sure you've got much more exciting things to talk about than my short film.
Oh,
and
I enjoyed it.
No.
It's 2:45 in the morning here.
Oh, yes.
So I think I'm going to say goodnight to you wonderful folks. And thank you for having me on the show and listen to me drone on.
It was a pleasure.
How can people find out more about the short and keep up with you and all the stuff you're up to?
And I have a Twitter account, which is called The Chaudoir, which is THE and then CHAUDOIR, and that's The Chaudoir. That's my Twitter account. I have a website for Bad Acid, the film, and it's called badacidfilm.com. And before I go, I'd like to just give a quick shout out to a couple of people on your side of the pond.
Yeah.
One of them is called Anthony Calviti, who very kindly backed my film Bad Acid because it was part crowdfunded. And another woman called Bess Katarinsky, and she is in Buffalo. Both of these guys are on the East Coast, by the way. And I'd just like to thank them for, helping me get this film made.
Awesome. Well,
and I shall leave you, wonderful people. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Absolutely.
And,
it was a really entertaining short.
Yeah,
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I will get in touch and say when it's coming onto Amazon. So
wonderful.
Great.
You can spread the word.
Definitely.
Thank you very much, Neil. Thank you, Annabelle. Thank you, Troy.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Have a good morning.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, it was a little longer than the 10 minutes he told me.
I did warn you, Neil. I do have a tendency to talk too much.
No, it was perfect. It's perfect.
Cheerio. Good night. Good day.
Bye.
All right, good day.
Bye.
Hi, this is Nicholas Vince, actor in Hellraiser and Nightbreed, author of What Monsters Do and Other People's Darkness, and you are listening to Without Your Head.